and welcome to Shelf Indulgence, our librarians book club, where we talk about book genres that are generally not selected for book clubs. And this month we are reading Latinx literature. So Star, you want to get it started?
Sure. So Latinx literature, for what we're going to talk about, is literature written in English by those living in the United States, as opposed to Spanish literature or other Mexican literature or literature from the other countries. So this means there's a wide variety of countries where these Americans have come from. So there's a wide variety of backgrounds: Mexico, Cuba, Puerto Rico, other countries in Latin and South America. But there are some similarities and topics that are across all of these different types. A major theme is how Latin Americans or Hispanics are viewed by the mainstream culture. And this sort of shapes a lot of the narratives of the books and novels. A lot of people are searching for a place to truly call home. Like, what does America mean to them, and how they're treated, which can lead to a lot of anger, frustration, or other problems. So they talk about race, racial discrimination, and another big theme is gender and gender violence and domination by males. And then I would say the third major theme is bilingualism, having to live with two main languages that they use. And I know there's been some discussion in things I read about books that use Spanish words interspersed through the English words, and a lot of times they're italicized. And there's a lot of discussion about, should they be italicized, since it's such a major point of reference for Latin American people in the United States, where they just automatically think and speak in two languages, and they want to normalize the fact that they are bilingual and they use both languages on an everyday basis. So I'm sure that the exact narratives that are out there and that we've read are shaped by the background of the author. So we'll see how that is when we talk about our individual titles. So I guess, Stephanie, why don't you tell us what you read?
Okay, so this month I read Olga Dies Dreaming by Xochitl Gonzalez. This, I think, is one of my favorites, if not the favorite so far for this year. So this is about Olga Acevedo. She's the daughter of Puerto Rican activists, and her mother vanished into the underground life as a revolutionary when Olga was about 12. And her father became a heroin addict and ultimately died of AIDS. He served in Vietnam. You know, he had a really tough life. Olga and her brother Pedro were raised by their grandmother in Brooklyn. She excelled in New York public schools and graduated from an Ivy League college. And at the opening of the book, we meet her in the summer of 2017. She's 39 and a very sought after high-end wedding planner. Her older brother is a progressive congressman and a divorced father who also happens to be a closeted gay man. And that secret has left him vulnerable to blackmail from very much not progressive real estate developers. So she's a very successful, self-made person. She's also very stuck and depressed. After a brief and disastrous foray into reality TV, she's realized that she's not allowed herself to become, well, she realizes that she's allowed herself to become distracted by this American dream. She wants to accumulate a lot of money. She wants to be successful, but she's not really happy. And she sort of does some weird, not so legit things to make that money. So she enters into some shady business dealings, which is kind of funny, but also a little scary for her. This book So her mother shows up every once in a while in the form of letters. So you get to see like sort of the dynamic between her and her mother, and also the dynamic between her mother and her brother. Her and her brother have a very close relationship, but they're kind of keeping secrets from each other. And it's a really interesting read to see how like the characters grow and progress and sort of like change their ideals and also grapple with like different familial issues and sort of like come together and realize that they can do better and like be better people. So very good. I think we're going to kick it over to Mallory, right?
Yes. So I cheated. I read a book by Sylvia Moreno Garcia, who is actually Canadian, Mexican Canadian, raised in Mexico City and currently based in Vancouver. But this book, Mexican Gothic, has been on my to-read list since it came out. And I really liked the first book by her that I read, which was Gods of Jade and Shadow. Highly recommend that one. It's like a jazz age, takes place in Mexico City and has a major crossover between sort of like Catholic tradition and indigenous Mexican culture. It's really interesting. Anyways, Mexican Gothic. I love Gothic books. That's probably my favorite genre. This one takes place in the 1950s, and the protagonist is Noemi, and she receives this mysterious letter from her recently married cousin, Catalina, who has been married to this kind of weird English family that lives out in the country in a bizarre big house, a hallmark of Gothic, that's isolated and very creepy. So Noemi is this debutante in the 1950s. I think I already said it takes place in the 1950s, but it takes place in the 1950s. So a big theme is sort of like misogyny and gender roles and the sort of like cultural conflicts between this English family and the Mexican protagonist and her Mexican cousin. So she goes out to this house, which is called the High Place, and immediately realizes something's wrong. Catalina is essentially trapped in this creepy, spooky house. And so she dons her like investigative hat and decides to figure out what's going on with this family. They're all weird. They all look exactly the same. And the whole house is like basically very decrepit, but these people are supposed to have owned a silver mine, and like, so things just aren't adding up. The letter that Catalina sends her asking for her to come says that they're trying to kill her. But when she gets there, it doesn't seem to be the case. So we're introduced to Catalina's husband's family, the Doyles. And Catalina is married to Virgil. His father is a creepy old patriarch named Howard, who basically has made his fortune on the backs of the local Mexican population, exploiting their labor. And so it touches on all of those themes that are common to this genre for Latinx writers. So it still fits our theme for this month. But she's investigating, and it just gets creepier and creepier. She starts sleepwalking, she starts having these nightmares. So it has all these Gothic elements of sort of like a haunting. And I'm not going to spoil this because it's got a really crazy like explanation behind everything that's going on that has to do with mushrooms, which I did not know at all going in. But she finds out that the Doyles basically have been intermarrying each other forever and ever, and like that's why they all look the same. They're real creepy. Howard, the patriarch's two wives, were sisters. One died under mysterious circumstances. The other one like basically perished in a mysterious way as well. Like everybody dies except Howard and a couple of other people. So the other people in the house are Francis, Howard's nephew, Florence, Francis's mother, so Howard's sister-ish, and then Virgil, the husband who's married to Catalina. So Noemi is dropped into this, and it's very English. They say very early on, like, we do not speak Spanish in this house. My father even Howard brought dirt over from Europe to make it a very English European like oasis among the Mexican culture there. So you have those elements of colonialism, and like Howard is an unabashed eugenicist and misogynist, like just the worst, the worst. So he's the antagonist, it turns out, and Virgil is also a major antagonist, but they're just real creepy. You have all of the like gothic stuff going on, but you also have like the very like visceral descriptions of like spores in the house. And so the mushrooms, like I said, have a lot to do with it, but I really don't want to spoil it because this was a crazy book that touched every single like it checked every box for me because the mystery is really good and the conclusion is really good too. But Noemi kind of bonds with Francis as sort of he's the black sheep, and Catalina unfortunately is repeatedly victimized. So you really get like the analogy of how basically the English people came in and just were literally trying to sap the identity out of the people that they're victimizing. So I think it fits the themes really well. And I would really highly recommend it. I liked it actually even more than Gods of Jade and Shadow, which was also really great, but not as much touching on all of those touchstones that the Latinx literature we're talking about, you know, really is about. So, Marnie, what did you read?
So I read Women and Salt by Gabriela Garcia, and it is her first novel. It was published in 2021. It's a work of fiction, and it explores themes of family, feminism, immigration, colonialism, and race, obviously. And it actually, the story touches on several generations. It starts in 1866. The story begins with Maria Isabel. She is a Cuban cigar roller at the factories, which is a really coveted or rather unusual position because it's dominated by men. And in fact, she makes half of what the men make. What the heck is that about? But they're also resentful for it. So that's where the story starts. And she is, I don't know if you guys knew this, that people who roll cigars usually at the factories, there's someone who reads the paper or reads novels. And in this cigar shop, Antonio is her love interest, but she doesn't really care for him, but he can read and she can't. And so he starts reading the newspaper and Victor Hugo novels. And during this time, it was right before the 10-year war with Spain, between Cuba and Spain. So some of the issues that start to happen are political because suddenly you can't read some of these things and start to censor and limit what kind of literature they share. And slowly, more and more factory workers start dying or just, you know, diminishing. And so she actually ends up marrying him only because her mother passes away and she has no one else left in the world. But he gets assassinated because if you guys know that they lost that war. So he gets assassinated because he refused to swear allegiance to the crown. And so she's left alone with his daughter. And then the story really has a very unconventional structure in that it jumps around from here on out. It is all of her descendants and how they experience the world depending on where they live. Some of them are still in Cuba, some of them are in the States. And sometimes it skips around not just from character to character, but also from year to year. So the story takes place from 1866 to 2019. And there's definitely, like Star said, underlying issues of, I don't know how I would, the coloring, like the colors, how they classify themselves based on that, how they view other people, and even between their own people, how they view people who were born there and people who live here. I mean, this is a really good book for a book club where everybody read this book, because I think everybody can find something worth discussing and elaborating, because then you get to see the difference between, because then it jumps into the other revolution, the 1959 between Castro and Batista, and how the politics of that changed the entire course of their family yet again. And so between mother and daughter, it's really the focus of the stories. The men have very toxic influences in the book, and it's usually the struggle that they have to overcome as a result of the men in their lives. But yeah, it's also kind of a failure about from parents, the parents' failure, because they are just doing their best, but eventually life happens, and it's not that they're good or bad, it's that they do the best they can within what they can do. So the mother Carmen, she came here during the revolution in '59, and she's part of that first wave of Cubans that usually they're assumed to be upper class, wealthy, and left before things got bad. So her daughter perceives her daughter who was born here, Jeanette, perceives her as snobbish and conservative, when her mother really isn't. And so it kind of also demonstrates the lack of knowledge, because her mother refuses to talk about why she came to this country, and in fact refuses to talk at all to her own mother. And so her daughter assumes it's because of a difference in politics and opinions, but it goes much deeper than that. And Jeanette, Carmen's daughter, is just constantly searching for her home, and she thinks that, you know, going back home will give her the answers, and she realizes that that's not the case at all, because when she gets there, that's not her home, and she's not seen as one of them. In fact, she meets a cousin that still lives there, and they talk about how Americans view Cuba in such a, either they romanticize it, you know, oh, the old cars, the old buildings, and the beauty of it falling apart, and other people, they just want to talk about how bad it is, but they don't really see it for what it is. And so the people that live in Cuba wish to go to America, but criticize people who want to go to America. And the people that live in America, you know, want to go there because they think they know what Cuba is. So even within its own culture, it's just such a complex mix of contradictions and emotions and beliefs that that you don't really know where you stand. You're just confused. So it'd be a good book for discussion. And then the only other counterpoint, the only two other characters who aren't Cuban are a mother and daughter who are from El Salvador. And I think they're shown to depict an entirely different immigrant experience, in that ICE comes and takes the mother away, and then the little girl comes home for school and there's nobody home because they took them off. And so it talks a little bit about the immigration system, and how at one point the little girl gets together with her mom, but then they drop them all off in Mexico. So it also shows how Americans kind of lump all of them together instead of understanding the different areas. So they're in Mexico, but they're not. They're lower. They're even lower than regular Mexicans because they're not one of them. So then the Mexicans are complaining about outsiders in the same way that Americans complain. So it's an interesting book. And it just shows those perspectives really well, and what it is to have the Latinx experience. And it's why you can't really clump them together, because they're all so different, and even within their own cultures, there's a lot of contradictions and prejudices and biases. So yeah, that's a Women in Salt.
Okay, so I wanted to read a classic title. So the first one that came to my mind was The House on Mango Street by Sandra Cisneros. And it was really short. I listened to it. It was read by the author, who I thought did a really good job of reading it. As I was going through it, I was surprised. I think if it was published today, it might be considered a YA book and not in the adult section. It's told from the point of view of a young girl who throughout the course of the book becomes like a teenager. And just her experience living in Chicago in poor areas, and they move around a lot to different apartments, but the majority of the time in the book, they live on Mango Street. And they talk about a lot of their neighbors. Some of them are Mexican Americans, some of them are from other places. I think a big theme throughout this book is what women face, females in general, and how fathers and husbands and boyfriends and brothers really dominate the females and kind of control what they do and what they should do and what they can do. And she knows, Esperanza is the girl, knows that she doesn't want to stay on Mango Street, and she doesn't want to stay in the poor area of town, that she wants to get an education. She likes to write and tell stories, and she wants to basically get out of here. And, you know, finally towards the end, there's some older ladies that she meets somewhere, and they sort of, she thinks that they see through her soul, and they basically just look at her and say, you're going to leave Mango Street, but don't ever forget where you came from. It's something that she was really thinking about. Obviously she wanted to leave, but keeping in mind where she came from and the other people that are still left there and what that all means. So because this was so short, I wanted to see something else by her. So I listened to Caramello by the same author. I could tell that the themes are very similar, that this was a more fleshed out, fully fledged generational story of Mexican Americans. And I'm assuming that some of these things in both books were taken from her own life experience. This one again is told from the girl's point of view, who throughout the book goes from a young girl to late teens. And it's the story of her and her family. They again grew up in Chicago in a poor apartment. Her father and his brothers run a custom upholstery shop in the city, and they kind of scrape by. But then once every summer, they all take a trip down to Mexico City to visit the awful grandmother. And it's kind of, even though they talk about the father and the grandfather and the brothers, it's again a story mostly, I think, about the females in the family, the mothers, the grandmothers, the sisters, the aunts, and the things that they have to go through in life, putting up with like illegitimate children and, you know, men who leave them and don't take care of them the way they should, or they don't get to do what they want, or, you know, make decisions on their own. So it follows them from Chicago to Mexico City, to Chicago, to San Antonio, back to Chicago. And again, the girls growing up and telling the story of her family and her mother and grandmother and family members. I think this author likes to write little vignettes that kind of bounce a little bit around. This one was more linear than The House on Mango Street, which really I felt jumped around. But I think it was a very good portrayal of probably what life was like in inner city Chicago for Mexican Americans or other Latin Americans in that time period. And then some of the experience in Mexico, because some of it takes place actually in Mexico or Acapulco or some of those places. So I wanted to read something by another author. So I read the book of Unknown Americans by Cristina Henriquez. This one was also about a Mexican American family who, there's a mother and father, they have one daughter. She has an accident that isn't explained later in the book. I don't want to say what it is. And they wait to go through proper channels so that they could come to the United States so that the daughter can go to a special education school. She has some sort of brain injury and she's not getting better in Mexico. And the doctors tell her that they should bring her to the United States to get the help that she needs so that she can improve. And they end up in Newark, Delaware, and the father has a visa to work, and he gets a job at a mushroom farm where he has to work like 8-10 hours a day in the dark without gloves, and he has to put his hands through crates to get mushrooms. And it's a really horrible, terrible job, and they don't get breaks, or they can't eat or go to the bathroom or anything. And in this apartment building, there's various people. Some of them are from Panama or Guatemala or all different places in Latin America or Central America or South America. And so while the main story focuses on the couple and their daughter and a little bit of the neighbors and their son, every once in a while, a short chapter is put in there from somebody else in the apartment building and their experience of why they came to this country and what they're doing now. I thought at one point you were going to see more of each person as we went along, but it's pretty much everybody had a short little chapter. But it was interesting that because they were all from different countries, they all had different experiences and different reasons for being there and experiences, which I thought was good. And I don't want to give too much away about what happens to the family and the girl, but it follows her, the daughter, and a lot of it's told from the daughter and the mother's point of view. Again, very female focused, and it shows that the men make a lot of decisions, but I think the women in this book have a little bit more, have asserted their power just a little bit more than those in the other books. But again, the neighbor's husband's sort of abusive and, you know, tells her she can't work. And so there's a lot of that gender issues in all of the books that I read. That's all right.
Yeah, I found my book was not a fast read, even though it wasn't long. It was complicated. It kind of made me stop and think about my own family history. It was just something I wanted to, you know, have an actual book club about, and I want to hear what people think. Because it wasn't, I don't like the way it was written. It was kind of jumping and all over the place, and it kind of reflects how fragmented these families are as a result of the, you know, the politics, the class systems, the immigration. So it kind of would make for a really good one, but I only have the one.
I forget what you said. When was that one released?
2021.
Okay, I thought you said that. I feel like that's been a major trend in literature lately, to have these like narratives that are jumping back and forth either between time periods or narrators. And actually I started reading sort of in the same vein as Mexican Gothic. I started reading The Hacienda that just came out. And this one's another one that switches points of view. Too? Yeah, it doesn't switch time periods, but it switches points of view between the like protagonist that's on the cover here, Beatrice, and a mysterious priest. So I've just noticed that trend, and I think it's interesting that it's.
I have too, but this one was even worse, because not worse, but I mean, like, it didn't just go from character to character. It would, it would talk about this person, this in their life at 2019, and then the next time they come back to them, it's 2014, and so you're like, so you don't have all the facts when you're reading it, and that kind of bugs me. It's like when you read a mystery and you can't even figure out who's doing it, and so you get mad because you're like, you gotta give me some clues, okay? So you have to at least, so you're kind of trying to figure it out. It makes you work for it. It really does.
Mine, Caramalo did that as well, and it sort of was confusing a little bit at times, but I think that in that book, it was done that way to, one, show that there was like a lot of family secrets or things people didn't talk about. And so because it's told from the point of view of a girl, she didn't know all the facts. So sometimes she would get bits and pieces from hearing from the grandmother or the grandfather or the father. And so her learning about the family history didn't come in a linear fashion. It came in bits and pieces. And like you said, there's a lot of different aunts and uncles and family members and family secrets. And, oh, by the way, your father had like an illegitimate daughter before he got married. And, oh, by the way, the grandfather had an affair. And, oh, by the way, you know, all these different secrets come out at different times. And some people know things and some people don't. So I think it is sort of a little bit of that family drama, but yet class kind of, when I say like experience that because their financial situations aren't secure, there's a lot of instability in where they are, what they're doing, which also leads to some chaos. And again, she also talks a lot about the discrimination between Mexicans and Mexicans that come from different parts, and light-skinned and dark-skinned, and the more Indian Mexicans. And the Mexicans felt that the kids that were born and raised in America weren't as good as the people in Mexico, and vice versa. And everybody had, you know, the wrong values. And the one aunt they called Auntie Light Skin because she had light skin. So there was a lot of strange, you know, discrimination amongst themselves too.
Yeah, an underlying theme was the younger generations trying to piece together, trying to figure out who they are based on who their families were. And that's a struggle because the parents don't want to share all those things. Sometimes, so a lot is lost, I felt. There's so much that, which it was such a sad story because you kind of get to the end and realize there's so much that person will never know because it's lost to time, politics, and, division, families getting torn apart. And so there are beautiful stories within there, but you're just trying to find them isn't easy.
I'll say both of mine that the Hacienda I'm not far enough in, but Mexican Gothic is very straightforward. Like the writing is very straightforward. You do have a lot of mysteries that sort of unfurl. Like there was a family member who shot a bunch of other family members and then shot herself, but you take that at face value at first, and then as like it starts hitting the climax, you realize like things are not as they appear and all that. So this one was really straightforward, and I felt like in ways it touched on a lot of the hallmarks that Star mentioned, but much less to do with like the class related and ancestry related stuff. It was more like tension between the actual people from Mexico, like the main character, versus that enforced like Englishness of the house that she's trapped in. So this one was a lot, like there was a lot of tension, but it was less focused on that kind of thing. So it was a really straightforward read for anybody who's looking for like something that kind of touches on that, but wants it to be very much more understandable because it was creepy and gross, but easy to read.
Yeah, if I didn't know the background of some of this, I would have found this book challenge even more challenging.
It sounds challenging.
Yeah, I know where it's coming from, but if I imagine they would be like, wait, what is this 10-year war?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's so much history in one little book. A lot of strong women.
Yeah, as I was reading about this genre, I found it interesting that, it talks about the modern, the Latin American literature it came from sort of like the civil rights movement in the 60s, and it started, but the really late modern literature seems to really be heavily influenced by female writers. When you look up a lot of articles, it gives you there's some male authors that they cite, but a lot of the modern literature is credited to a lot of these female authors, which I found very interesting. I don't know if it's because they're finally trying to use their voice to put their experiences out there, but it seems very female dominated right now in this area.
Thanks everyone for watching, and make sure to tune in next month where we'll be reading and discussing books about demons and demonic possession just in time for Halloween. Thank you. Bye.